On the morning of September 11th, 2001, the world witnessed one of the most devastating terrorist attacks in modern history. The coordinated hijacking of 4 commercial airliners by 19 militants associated with Al-Qaeda led to the destruction of the Twin Towers in New York City, severe damage to the Pentagon, and the loss of nearly 3,000 lives. This event not only reshaped global security policies, but also solidified the name Osama bin Laden as the face of modern terrorism. But who was bin Laden, and how did he orchestrate such a catastrophic event? To understand the impact of his actions, it is essential to examine his background, the ideology he followed, and the formation of Al-Qaeda. Who was Osama bin Laden? Osama bin Muhammad bin Awad bin Laden was born on March 10, 1957, in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, into a wealthy and influential family. His father, Mohammed bin Laden, was a billionaire construction magnate with strong ties to the Saudi royal family. Despite his privileged upbringing, Osama bin Laden was deeply influenced by conservative Islamic teachings, particularly the rigid interpretations of Sunni Islam promoted by the Wahhabi movement. During his years at King Abdulaziz University, bin Laden was drawn to radical Islamic ideologies. He became increasingly influenced by the teachings of Abdullah Azzam, a Palestinian scholar and key figure in the global jihadist movement. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 became a turning point in bin Laden's life. He traveled to Afghanistan, where he used his wealth and influence to fund and support the Mujahideen, the Islamic fighters resisting Soviet forces. This experience not only solidified his belief in armed jihad, but also provided him with the foundation to establish his own militant organization, Al-Qaeda. The ideology of jihad and rise of Al-Qaeda. At the core of Osama bin Laden's ideology was the concept of global jihad, a belief that Islamic warriors had a religious duty to fight against perceived enemies of Islam, particularly Western nations and secular Muslim governments. This ideology was deeply rooted in the works of Islamist thinkers such as Sayyid Qutb, who saw Western influence as a corrupting force threatening the Islamic way of life. In 1988, bin Laden formally established Al-Qaeda, which means the base in Arabic. Initially, the group focused on supporting Mujahideen fighters in Afghanistan, but as bin Laden's ambitions grew, Al-Qaeda evolved into a global terrorist network. By the early 1990s, bin Laden turned his attention to the United States, which he saw as the greatest oppressor of the Muslim world. He was particularly incensed by the presence of U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia following the Gulf War, viewing it as an occupation of Islamic holy lands. Al-Qaeda's emergence as a global threat. Throughout the 1990s, Al-Qaeda carried out a series of attacks that demonstrated its growing capabilities. In 1998, bin Laden issued a fatwa declaring it a religious duty for Muslims to kill Americans and their allies wherever they could. That same year, Al-Qaeda orchestrated simultaneous bombings of U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, killing over 200 people. 2 years later, the group was responsible for the attack on the USS Cole, a U.S. Navy destroyer, in Yemen. These attacks signaled Al-Qaeda's intent to wage war against the United States and its allies. However, it was the events of September 11, 2001, that catapulted bin Laden and his organization to global infamy. The sheer scale and audacity of the 9/11 attacks led the U.S. to launch the War on Terror, a worldwide effort to dismantle terrorist networks and eliminate bin Laden himself. The global impact of Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden's actions reshaped international politics, security policies, and military strategies. In response to September 11th, the United States invaded Afghanistan in October 2001, toppling the Taliban regime that had provided sanctuary to Al-Qaeda. The US also implemented sweeping counter-terrorism measures, such as the Patriot Act, increased surveillance, and enhanced airport security worldwide. Beyond military and political responses, bin Laden's ideology inspired numerous terrorist organizations and lone wolf attackers across the globe. Groups such as ISIS emerged in the aftermath of Al-Qaeda's decline, adopting even more extreme tactics to further the cause of jihadist terrorism. Despite being killed in a US Navy SEAL operation in 2011, bin Laden's legacy continues to influence extremist movements. His ability to manipulate religious ideology, exploit geopolitical conflicts, and utilize modern technology for recruitment and propaganda set the blueprint for future terrorist organizations. Osama bin Laden's rise from a privileged Saudi youth to the mastermind of the deadliest terrorist attack in history highlights the dangerous intersection of ideology, geopolitics, and militant extremism. His formation of Al-Qaeda and orchestration of the 9/11 attacks marked a turning point in global history, leading to wars, policy shifts, and an ongoing struggle against terrorism. While bin Laden is gone, the ideology he championed remains a persistent threat, demonstrating that the fight against extremism is far from over. Early life and radicalization. Osama bin Muhammad bin Awad bin Laden was born on March 10, 1957, in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, into one of the wealthiest and most influential families in the kingdom. His father, Mohammed bin Laden, was a billionaire construction magnate who founded the Saudi bin Laden Group, a company closely tied to the Saudi royal family. Osama was the 17th of more than 50 children born to Mohammed bin Laden, whose multiple wives and vast business empire made him a powerful figure in Saudi society. However, despite his privileged upbringing, Osama bin Laden would take a drastically different path, one that would lead him to become the most infamous terrorist leader of the 21st century. Family, education, and religious influence, raised primarily by his mother, Aliyah Ghanem, after his father's death in a helicopter crash in 1967. Osama bin Laden grew up in a devout Sunni Muslim household. His family adhered to Wahhabism, an austere and puritanical interpretation of Islam that shaped much of Saudi Arabia's religious and political landscape. From a young age, bin Laden was influenced by these teachings, which emphasized strict adherence to Islamic law and viewed Western influence as a corrupting force. Bin Laden was educated at King Abdulaziz University in Jeddah, where he studied economics and business administration. However, his primary interest was not in business, but in religious studies. During his university years, he was deeply influenced by radical Islamist scholars, particularly Abdullah Azzam, a Palestinian theologian who preached the necessity of jihad against non-Muslim forces occupying Muslim lands. Azzam's teachings played a crucial role in shaping bin Laden's ideology, reinforcing the belief that armed struggle was a religious duty. At the same time, bin Laden was exposed to the works of Sayyid Qutb, an Egyptian Islamist thinker who had written extensively on the dangers of westernization and the need for a global Islamic resurgence. Qutb's ideas, combined with Azzam's advocacy for violent jihad, set bin Laden on the path toward radicalization. The Soviet-Afghan War, a turning point. In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan to support its communist-aligned government against Islamic insurgents. This event was a turning point in bin Laden's life. Seeing the invasion as an attack on the Muslim world, he decided to join the Mujahideen, the Afghan resistance fighters battling Soviet forces. Bin Laden did not immediately become a frontline fighter. Instead, he used his vast wealth and connections to support the Mujahideen. He funded training camps, provided logistical support, and arranged for foreign fighters, many from Arab nations, to join the resistance. His role in the war made him a respected figure among jihadist groups, as he was seen as both a financier and an active participant in the fight against Soviet occupation. During his time in Afghanistan, bin Laden also forged crucial relationships with other militant leaders. He worked closely with Ayman al-Zawahiri, an Egyptian jihadist who would later become the second-in-command of Al-Qaeda, and he continued his alliance with Abdullah Azzam. Together, they established Maktab al-Khidamat, a recruitment and support network that funneled fighters and resources into Afghanistan. Although the Mujahideen eventually forced the Soviets to withdraw in 1989, bin Laden's time in Afghanistan had profoundly changed him. He had not only gained military experience, but had also developed a vision of global jihad, one that would extend far beyond Afghanistan. Formation of Al-Qaeda and shift toward global jihad. Following the Soviet withdrawal, bin Laden returned to Saudi Arabia, where he was initially welcomed as a hero. However, his relationship with the Saudi government soured after the Gulf War in 1990 to 1991. When Iraq invaded Kuwait, the Saudi monarchy allowed U.S. troops to be stationed on its soil to repel Saddam Hussein's forces. Bin Laden saw this as a grave betrayal, an unacceptable presence of infidels in the land of Islam's holiest sites, Mecca and Medina. His vocal criticism of the Saudi leadership led to his exile in 1992. He relocated to Sudan, where he established training camps and built financial networks to support jihadist movements worldwide. It was during this period that Al-Qaeda, meaning the base in Arabic, began to take shape. Bin Laden envisioned Al-Qaeda as an organization that would not only provide training and resources for militant groups, but also launch direct attacks against perceived enemies of Islam, most notably the United States. By the mid-1990s, bin Laden had become one of the most wanted terrorists in the world. His ideology had evolved from a regional struggle against occupying forces to a global campaign against the West, setting the stage for the deadly attacks that would follow. Osama bin Laden's journey from a privileged Saudi youth to a militant leader was shaped by a combination of religious influences, political events, and personal experiences. His radicalization was fueled by his exposure to extremist ideologies, his involvement in the Afghan resistance, and his growing disillusionment with Western presence in the Muslim world. The foundation he built during the Soviet-Afghan War would serve as the basis for Al-Qaeda, an organization that would go on to change the course of global history. Formation of Al-Qaeda and conflicts with the West. By the early 1990s, Osama bin Laden had evolved from a wealthy Saudi dissident into the leader of an emerging global jihadist movement. His experiences in the Soviet-Afghan War had given him the resources, reputation, and connections necessary to build a militant network that would soon challenge the world's most powerful nations. The formation of Al-Qaeda marked a turning point in modern terrorism, as bin Laden sought to transform regional conflicts into a global struggle against the West. Exile from Saudi Arabia and the birth of Al-Qaeda, following the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan in 1989, bin Laden returned to Saudi Arabia, where he was initially hailed as a hero for his role in the resistance. However, the Gulf War of 1990 to 1991 created a deep rift between bin Laden and the Saudi monarchy. When Saddam Hussein's Iraqi forces invaded Kuwait, bin Laden offered to use his network of Mujahideen fighters to defend the kingdom. The Saudi government, however, rejected his offer and instead invited U.S. military forces to station troops in Saudi Arabia. For bin Laden, this was a betrayal of Islam. He viewed the presence of non-Muslim military forces on the land of Mecca and Medina as an unacceptable violation of Islamic sanctity. Enraged, he openly criticized the Saudi government and called for the expulsion of American forces. His outspoken opposition led to his exile in 1992, forcing him to relocate to Sudan, where he was welcomed by the Islamist regime of Omar al-Bashir. In Sudan, bin Laden began laying the groundwork for what would become Al-Qaeda, the base in Arabic. His organization was initially an extension of Maktab al-Khidamat, MAC, the recruitment and logistical network he had built with Abdullah Azzam during the Afghan War. However, after Azzam's assassination in 1989, bin Laden took full control and redirected its purpose. No longer just a support network, Al-Qaeda would now serve as a direct combat force, training militants for jihadist operations around the world. During his time in Sudan, 1992 to 1996, bin Laden used his wealth and business acumen to establish training camps, arms smuggling networks, and financial enterprises to fund terrorist activities. He also began forging alliances with other extremist groups, particularly the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, EIJ, led by Ayman al-Zawahiri. The partnership between bin Laden and al-Zawahiri would be instrumental in shaping Al-Qaeda's ideology and operational capabilities. However, under increasing international pressure, Sudan expelled bin Laden in 1996. He returned to Afghanistan, where the newly established Taliban regime provided him with a safe haven. It was from this sanctuary that Al-Qaeda would escalate its war against the United States and its allies. Al-Qaeda's ideology, a call for global jihad. By the mid-1990s, bin Laden had crystallized his vision of jihad into a coherent ideology. His beliefs were heavily influenced by the works of Sayyid Qutb, the Egyptian Islamist who argued that Western influence and secular Muslim governments were corrupting Islamic societies. Bin Laden took these ideas further, advocating for a global jihad, a holy war that extended beyond local conflicts to include direct attacks on the West. In 1996, bin Laden issued his first official fatwa, religious edict, titled Declaration of Jihad Against the Americans Occupying the Land of the Two Holy Sanctuaries. In this document, he framed the U.S. military presence in Saudi Arabia as an act of war against Islam and called on Muslims to rise up against American forces. 2 years later, in 1998, bin Laden escalated his rhetoric with a second fatwa, co-signed by Ayman al-Zawahiri, titled Jihad Against Jews and Crusaders. This declaration made it a religious duty for Muslims to kill Americans and their allies wherever they could. The document was a direct challenge to the global order, signaling that Al-Qaeda was now targeting civilians and military personnel alike. Al-Qaeda's first major attacks on the United States. While bin Laden had been active in supporting jihadist movements since the late 1980s, it was in the late 1990s that Al-Qaeda emerged as a direct threat to the United States. The group orchestrated 2 major attacks that shocked the world and demonstrated its ability to strike American targets overseas. 1998 U.S. Embassy bombings. On August 7, 1998, Al-Qaeda carried out simultaneous truck bombings at the U.S. embassies in Nairobi, Kenya, and Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. The attacks killed 224 people, including 12 Americans, and injured over 4,000 others. The bombings were devastating, reducing the embassy buildings to rubble and sending a clear message that Al-Qaeda had the capability to launch large-scale, coordinated attacks. The embassy bombings were a turning point for U.S. counterterrorism efforts. In response, President Bill Clinton ordered missile strikes on suspected Al-Qaeda training camps in Afghanistan and a pharmaceutical plant in Sudan that was believed to be producing chemical weapons for bin Laden's network. However, these strikes failed to eliminate Al-Qaeda's leadership and arguably strengthened bin Laden's image as a resistance leader among jihadist circles. 2000 USS Cole bombing. On October 12, 2000, Al-Qaeda operatives carried out another bold attack, this time targeting the USS Cole, a U.S. Navy destroyer docked in Aden, Yemen. Two suicide bombers in a small boat packed with explosives maneuvered close to the ship and detonated their payload, killing 17 American sailors and injuring dozens more. The attack was a tactical success for Al-Qaeda, proving that even highly fortified military targets were vulnerable. It also demonstrated the effectiveness of suicide bombings, a method that would later be used in the 9/11 attacks. However, despite intelligence warnings and growing concerns about Al-Qaeda's activities, the U.S. response remained largely reactive rather than proactive. Bin Laden's growing confidence and the road to September 11th. By the turn of the 21st century, bin Laden had positioned himself as the undisputed leader of a transnational terrorist network with the ability to strike at American interests worldwide. Encouraged by the lack of a decisive U.S. response to the embassy bombings and the USS Cole attack, he began planning an even more audacious operation, one that would take the war to American soil. In 1999, Al-Qaeda operatives began training for what would become the September 11, 2001 attacks. The plan involved hijacking commercial airliners and using them as weapons to strike symbolic and strategic targets in the United States. This unprecedented attack would soon change the course of history and mark the beginning of the US-led war on terror. Osama bin Laden's exile from Saudi Arabia and his subsequent efforts to build Al-Qaeda marked the emergence of a new kind of global terrorism, one that transcended national borders and targeted the very foundations of Western power. His ideology of jihad against the West, his ability to mobilize resources, and his strategic planning made Al-Qaeda one of the most dangerous terrorist organizations in history. The embassy bombings in 1998 and the USS Cole attack in 2000 were clear warnings of the devastation that bin Laden was capable of unleashing. Yet the full extent of his ambitions would not be realized until September 11, 2001, when Al-Qaeda executed the deadliest terrorist attack on American soil. That fateful day would alter global security policies, spark wars, and cement bin Laden's name in history as the mastermind of modern jihadist terrorism. Planning and execution of September 11th. The September 11th, 2001 attacks were the culmination of years of meticulous planning by Osama bin Laden and his Al-Qaeda network. It was not an impulsive act of terror, but a highly coordinated, multi-phase operation designed to inflict maximum destruction and psychological trauma on the United States. From initial conceptualization in the mid-1990s to the recruitment and training of the hijackers, the plot evolved into the deadliest terrorist attack in modern history. The genesis of the 9/11 plot, 1996 to 1999. The roots of the 9/11 attacks can be traced back to 1996, when bin Laden returned to Afghanistan after being expelled from Sudan. At this point, he was already focused on striking American targets, believing that the US military presence in the Middle East, particularly in Saudi Arabia, was an affront to Islam. It was in Afghanistan that bin Laden met Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, KSM, a Pakistani militant with extensive experience in jihadist operations. KSM had previously proposed an ambitious plan to attack the United States by hijacking multiple airplanes and using them as missiles. This idea, originally called the Bojinka Plot, had been conceived in the mid-1990s as a scheme to blow up trans-Pacific flights, but was foiled by authorities in the Philippines. Bin Laden saw the potential in KSM's concept, but wanted to refine it into something even more devastating. Instead of merely bombing planes, he envisioned a coordinated attack that would strike at the heart of American power. Symbolic and strategic targets in New York and Washington, D.C. By late 1998, bin Laden had given the green light for the operation, and planning began in earnest. The attack would require funding, training, logistical coordination, and most importantly, operatives who were capable of infiltrating the U.S. Recruitment and training of the 9/11 hijackers, 1999 to 2001. Selection of the operatives. One of the biggest challenges in executing such a sophisticated attack was recruiting individuals who could evade detection. Al-Qaeda needed men who could blend into Western society, obtain visas, and receive flight training without raising suspicion. The first recruits came from a group of radicalized men living in Hamburg, Germany, known as the Hamburg Cell. This group included Mohammed Atta, Egypt, the operational leader of the 9/11 attacks and pilot of American Airlines Flight 11. Marwan al-Shehi, UAE, pilot of United Airlines Flight 175. Ziad Jarrah, Lebanon, pilot of United Airlines Flight 93. Ramzi bin al-Shib, Yemen, a key facilitator who was unable to obtain a U.S. visa and played a logistical role. These men were highly educated, fluent in multiple languages, and had lived in the West for years. Their ability to assimilate made them ideal candidates for the mission. The remaining hijackers were recruited primarily from Saudi Arabia and other Middle Eastern countries. These men, known as the muscle hijackers, were responsible for subduing passengers and taking control of the planes. Flight training and preparation. Once recruited, the hijackers were sent to Afghanistan for ideological indoctrination and basic combat training. However, the most critical phase was learning how to pilot commercial airliners. In mid-2000, the first group of operatives, led by Mohammed Atta, arrived in the United States. They enrolled in flight schools in Florida, Arizona, and California, taking lessons on how to fly Boeing aircraft. Despite their lack of interest in landing techniques, which raised some red flags among instructors, they managed to avoid scrutiny. During this period, Al-Qaeda's financial network provided the hijackers with money for their expenses. Funding came through bank transfers, charitable donations, and informal money transfer systems, Hawala. By mid-2001, the operatives had completed their training and were waiting for final instructions. Bin Laden personally met with them in Afghanistan to confirm the details and give them his blessing. The execution of the 9/11 attacks, the morning of September 11th, 2001. At approximately 8 a.m. Eastern Time on September 11th, 2001, 19 Al-Qaeda operatives boarded 4 commercial airliners at different airports along the East Coast. The flights were chosen because they were long-haul routes with full fuel tanks, ensuring maximum destruction upon impact. The planes and their intended targets were American Airlines Flight 11, Boston to Los Angeles, hijacked by Mohammed Atta and crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center at 8:46 a.m. United Airlines Flight 175, Boston-Los Angeles, hijacked by Marwan al-Shehi and crashed into the South Tower at 9:03 a.m. American Airlines Flight 77, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, hijacked and crashed into the Pentagon at 9:37 a.m. United Airlines Flight 93, Newark, San Francisco, intended target was likely the U.S. Capitol or the White House, but passengers fought back, and the plane crashed in Pennsylvania at 10:03 a.m. The hijackings and impact. At approximately 8:14 a.m., Flight 11 was the first to be hijacked. Mohammed Atta, sitting in first class, led the takeover. Within minutes, the hijackers stormed the cockpit, killed the pilots, and took control. Similar sequences unfolded on the other flights. Passengers and crew members, realizing what was happening, began making phone calls to loved ones and authorities. These calls provided real-time intelligence and confirmed that the hijackers were using knives and box cutters as weapons. At 8:46 a.m., Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center, creating an inferno and sending debris raining down on New York City. 17 minutes later, Flight 175 slammed into the South Tower, confirming that the crashes were not accidents, but deliberate attacks. At 9:37 a.m., Flight 77 struck the Pentagon, causing massive structural damage and killing 125 military personnel in addition to the passengers. Meanwhile, passengers aboard Flight 93 learned about the other attacks through phone calls. Determined to prevent another disaster, they stormed the cockpit, fighting the hijackers. The plane ultimately crashed in a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, killing all on board but preventing further devastation. By 10:28 a.m., the North Tower collapsed, following the earlier collapse of the South Tower at 9:59 a.m. The once iconic Twin Towers were reduced to rubble, burying thousands beneath the wreckage. Not immediate aftermath and global response. The 9/11 attacks killed nearly 3,000 people and injured thousands more. The U.S. government, stunned by the scale of the destruction, quickly identified Al-Qaeda as the perpetrator. In response, President George W. Bush declared the war on terror, launching military operations in Afghanistan to dismantle Al-Qaeda and remove the Taliban from power. Al-Qaeda's success and strategic failure. From a tactical perspective, September 11th was a success for Al-Qaeda. It inflicted enormous casualties, humiliated the United States, and provoked military overreach that destabilized the Middle East. However, strategically, it was a failure. The attack united the world against Al-Qaeda, leading to bin Laden's eventual killing in 2011 and the decimation of the organization. The 9/11 attacks were the result of years of careful planning, recruitment, and training by Al-Qaeda. They exposed vulnerabilities in U.S. security and changed global politics forever. While bin Laden achieved his goal of striking at America, the attacks ultimately led to the dismantling of his network and the prolonged war on terror. Despite the destruction, the resilience shown by first responders, passengers on Flight 93, and the global community in the aftermath of 9/11 stands as a testament to humanity's ability to confront evil with courage, immediate aftermath, and global impact. The September 11th, 2001 attacks were a defining moment in modern history. The immediate aftermath saw shock, grief, and anger sweeping across the United States and the world. In response, the U.S. government launched an unprecedented campaign against terrorism, implementing aggressive domestic policies and embarking on military interventions abroad. The attacks also reshaped global geopolitics, fueling the rise of new extremist groups and altering international relations for decades to come. America's response: the War on Terror and the Patriot Act. In the hours and days following the attacks, the United States experienced a wave of unity and patriotism. President George W. Bush, in a national address on the evening of September 11th, vowed to bring those responsible to justice, stating, "We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them." This declaration set the stage for what would become the War on Terror, a global effort to dismantle terrorist networks and prevent future attacks. The Patriot Act and domestic security measures. On October 26, 2001, just over a month after 9/11, President Bush signed the USA Patriot Act into law. This legislation significantly expanded the surveillance capabilities of law enforcement agencies, allowing them to monitor phone calls, emails, financial transactions, and library records of suspected terrorists. The act also strengthened border security, made it easier to detain and deport non-citizens suspected of terrorism, and increased the ability of intelligence agencies to share information. While many Americans supported these measures as necessary for national security, critics argued that they infringed on civil liberties and privacy rights. In addition to the Patriot Act, airport security underwent a dramatic overhaul. The Transportation Security Administration, TSA, was established in November 2001, implementing stricter screening processes, including mandatory shoe removal, liquid restrictions, and full-body scans at airports. The Department of Homeland Security, DHS, was also created in 2002 to coordinate efforts against terrorism domestically. The phrase, "If you see something, say something," became a nationwide slogan, reflecting the heightened sense of vigilance across the country. U.S. invasion of Afghanistan. Toppling the Taliban, 2001 to 2002. While domestic security was a priority, the U.S. also sought to eliminate Al-Qaeda at its source. Intelligence quickly confirmed that Osama bin Laden and his network were operating under the protection of the Taliban, the ruling regime in Afghanistan. Operation Enduring Freedom. The war begins. On October 7, 2001, less than a month after the attacks, the U.S. launched Operation Enduring Freedom, a full-scale military invasion of Afghanistan. The initial strategy combined airstrikes, special forces operations, and collaboration with the Northern Alliance, an Afghan opposition group fighting the Taliban. By mid-November, key Afghan cities, including Kabul and Kandahar, fell to coalition forces. The Taliban regime officially collapsed in December 2001, with its leaders fleeing to remote mountainous regions or seeking refuge in Pakistan. Despite the rapid success, Osama bin Laden and top Al-Qaeda leaders managed to escape, most notably during the Battle of Tora Bora in December 2001. Although the Taliban had been removed from power, the U.S. soon found itself entangled in a prolonged conflict. Taliban fighters regrouped in Pakistan and launched an insurgency that would plague Afghanistan for the next 2 decades. The global ripple effect of 9/11. The impact of 9/11 and the War on Terror extended far beyond Afghanistan. Governments around the world adjusted their security policies, terrorism became a central issue in international diplomacy, and new extremist groups emerged in the wake of Al-Qaeda's decline. Global counterterrorism efforts. Many U.S. allies supported the war on terror, leading to the formation of an international coalition against terrorism. NATO invoked Article 5, the Collective Defense Clause, for the first time in its history, declaring that the attacks on the U.S. were an attack on all NATO members. Countries like the United Kingdom, Canada, Germany, and Australia contributed troops to Afghanistan. Nations worldwide strengthened anti-terrorism laws, tightened immigration controls, and expanded intelligence sharing programs. Even traditionally neutral nations increased counterterrorism operations, fearing that their own cities could become the next target. The rise of other terrorist groups. While the U.S. focused on Al-Qaeda, the broader war on terror inadvertently created conditions for new extremist movements to emerge. 1. Al-Qaeda franchises. After 9/11, Al-Qaeda decentralized into a network of regional branches, including Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, AQAP, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, AQI, and Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, AQIM. These offshoots conducted deadly attacks in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, showing that Al-Qaeda's ideology survived even as its leadership was hunted down. The emergence of ISIS-O. In 2003, the U.S. invaded Iraq, toppling Saddam Hussein's government. The power vacuum led to chaos, allowing Abu Musab al-Zarqawi to form Al-Qaeda in Iraq, AQI, which later evolved into the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS. By 2014, ISIS surpassed Al-Qaeda in brutality and ambition, declaring a caliphate and carrying out attacks worldwide. Third, lone wolf terrorism. Inspired by 9/11 and extremist propaganda, individual attackers carried out bombings, shootings, and vehicular attacks in cities like London, Paris, and New York. These attacks, often encouraged but not directly coordinated by terrorist groups, proved that jihadist ideology had taken root globally. Long-term impact, a changed world, endless wars, and instability. Despite the initial success of the war on terror, the U.S. remained in Afghanistan for 20 years, engaging in what became the longest war in American history. The war cost over $2 trillion and led to the deaths of more than 170,000 people, including civilians, soldiers, and insurgents. In 2021, the U.S. withdrew from Afghanistan, and within weeks, the Taliban regained control, raising questions about the effectiveness of the war. The 2003 Iraq War, justified in part by claims of weapons of mass destruction, which were never found, further destabilized the region and contributed to the rise of ISIS. Erosion of civil liberties. Governments worldwide expanded surveillance programs, often at the expense of privacy rights. Edward Snowden's revelations in 2013 exposed mass surveillance by the U.S. National Security Agency, NSA, sparking global debates on privacy versus security, Islamophobia, and global divides. September 11th fueled widespread Islamophobia, with hate crimes against Muslims increasing in the US and Europe. Airport profiling, immigration bans, and anti-Muslim sentiment became more common, further deepening divisions between the West and the Muslim world. The immediate aftermath of September 11th reshaped the global order. The United States responded with unprecedented military, legislative, and intelligence measures, launching the war on terror and toppling the Taliban. While these efforts dismantled Al-Qaeda's core leadership, they also sparked prolonged wars, humanitarian crises, and the rise of new terrorist groups like ISIS. 20 years after the attacks, the world continues to grapple with the consequences. The lessons of September 11th remain relevant today, reminding us of the delicate balance between security and civil liberties, the unintended consequences of military intervention, and the ever-evolving nature of global terrorism. The manhunt, tracking Osama bin Laden. The hunt for Osama bin Laden was one of the most intense and prolonged manhunts in modern history. Following the September 11th attacks, the United States launched a relentless pursuit to capture or kill the mastermind behind the deadliest terrorist attack on American soil. Over the course of nearly a decade, bin Laden evaded capture by escaping Afghanistan, exploiting the rugged terrain of the region and relying on a vast network of loyal supporters. Despite his ability to remain hidden, advances in intelligence gathering, technological surveillance, and the persistent efforts of the CIA and US military eventually led to his discovery in Abbottabad, Pakistan, where he was killed in a daring Navy SEAL operation in May 2011 from Afghanistan and disappearance. The Battle of Tora Bora, December 2001. After the fall of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan in December 2001, intelligence sources pinpointed Osama bin Laden's location in the Tora Bora cave complex, a mountainous region near the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. Bin Laden and his fighters took advantage of the treacherous terrain, which was filled with tunnels, bunkers, and natural fortifications that made aerial bombardments ineffective. The US military, along with Afghan allies, launched a full-scale assault to eliminate bin Laden and his inner circle. Despite intense fighting and heavy airstrikes, bin Laden managed to escape, likely slipping across the border into Pakistan, where he would remain in hiding for nearly a decade. His ability to evade capture at Tora Bora was later criticized, with some experts arguing that a larger US ground force could have sealed off the escape routes. However, the mountainous region, combined with bin Laden's deep network of local supporters, made the operation extremely challenging. How bin Laden evaded capture. Once bin Laden had disappeared into Pakistan, he adapted his lifestyle to avoid detection. Unlike other high-profile fugitives who might continue traveling or engaging in direct communication, bin Laden went into deep hiding, limiting his movements and communication to an extreme degree. 1. Cutting off digital communication. One of the key strategies bin Laden employed was completely avoiding electronic communication. He never used cell phones, emails, or the internet, understanding that US intelligence agencies had the capability to track such communications. Instead, he relied on human couriers to transmit messages between himself and his followers. These couriers, particularly Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti, played a critical role in maintaining contact with Al-Qaeda's operations while keeping bin Laden's location secret. 2. Relying on trusted networks. Bin Laden had an extensive support network within Pakistan, including individuals sympathetic to his cause. It is believed that elements within Pakistan's intelligence services, ISI, may have turned a blind eye to his presence. His ability to live undetected for years suggests that at least some officials or powerful figures in Pakistan were either complicit or willfully ignorant of his presence. Moving between safe houses. For much of the 2000s, bin Laden likely moved between various safe houses in Pakistan's tribal regions, an area known for its porous borders, mountainous landscapes, and limited government oversight. Reports indicate that he spent time in Waziristan, a region known as a militant stronghold, before eventually settling in Abbottabad in 2005. Abbottabad, a quiet garrison town, seemed like an unusual place for the world's most wanted terrorist, but its proximity to military academies and a lack of scrutiny made it an ideal hideout. U.S. efforts to track bin Laden. While bin Laden remained hidden, the U.S. devoted enormous resources to finding him. 1. Intelligence operations and enhanced surveillance. The U.S. intelligence community, particularly the CIA, intensified efforts to locate bin Laden using drone surveillance to monitor suspected Al-Qaeda compounds in Pakistan, human intelligence, humanity, through informants and captured militants, financial tracking of suspected Al-Qaeda transactions. Despite these efforts, no confirmed sightings of bin Laden surfaced for years. Many intelligence officials feared he was either dead or completely cut off from Al-Qaeda operations. The role of detainees in Guantanamo Bay. During interrogations of captured Al-Qaeda operatives at Guantanamo Bay, U.S. officials repeatedly heard references to a trusted courier known as Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti. One detainee described him as someone who frequently communicated with bin Laden. Another stated that if anyone knew bin Laden's location, it was al-Kuwaiti. While it took years to verify these claims, this information would eventually lead to bin Laden's capture. Identifying the Abbottabad compound. By 2010, the CIA had identified Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti's location in Abbottabad, Pakistan. Through persistent surveillance, they observed that the compound had unusual security measures, including no phone or internet connection, high walls with barbed wire, a mysterious tall man who never left the compound, whom analysts suspected could be bin Laden. After months of observation, President Barack Obama authorized Operation Neptune's Spear, the U.S. Navy SEAL mission to raid the compound and kill or capture bin Laden. The final chapter, bin Laden's death, May 2, 2011. On May 2, 2011, a team of Navy SEALs from SEAL Team 6, along with CIA operatives, conducted a covert nighttime raid on bin Laden's compound in Abbottabad. Helicopters carrying U.S. forces flew from Afghanistan into Pakistan without informing the Pakistani government. SEALs breached the compound's walls and engaged in a short but intense firefight. Osama bin Laden was found on the third floor of the main house. After identifying him, the SEALs shot and killed bin Laden, along with several of his family members and bodyguards. His body was taken to Afghanistan, where DNA testing confirmed his identity. Later that day, he was buried at sea, according to Islamic customs. The manhunt for Osama bin Laden was a decade-long pursuit that combined human intelligence, advanced surveillance technology, and military operations. His ability to evade capture for years demonstrated his deep understanding of counter-surveillance tactics and the protection afforded by his network of supporters. However, the relentless efforts of the CIA, NSA, and U.S. military ultimately led to his downfall. His death marked the end of an era for Al-Qaeda, but the terrorist ideology he championed continues to inspire extremist groups worldwide. Operation Neptune's Spear, the mission to kill Osama bin Laden. On May 2, 2011, after nearly a decade of searching, Osama bin Laden was finally located and killed in a covert U.S. military operation known as Operation Neptune's Spear. The mission, carried out by SEAL Team 6 and coordinated by the CIA, was a high-risk, high-stakes endeavor that took place in Abbottabad, Pakistan, a city just a few miles from the country's premier military academy. The successful execution of the mission marked the end of one of the longest and most intense manhunts in history. However, it also raised numerous geopolitical tensions, particularly between the U.S. and Pakistan, whose government was not informed of the operation in advance. The intelligence breakthrough, locating bin Laden. The CIA had been searching for bin Laden's location for years, but the key breakthrough came in 2010, when intelligence operatives tracked a trusted Al-Qaeda courier named Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti to a high-security compound in Abbottabad. Through satellite imagery and on-ground intelligence gathering, the CIA observed several suspicious features about the compound. No phone lines or internet connections, an unusual trait for a high-value residence. Excessive security, including 14 to 18 feet, 4 to 5 meters, high walls topped with barbed wire. A large main building with a third-floor balcony where a tall man, suspected to be bin Laden, was sometimes seen walking. After months of surveillance, CIA analysts concluded that the compound most likely housed Osama bin Laden and his family. By early 2011, President Barack Obama was briefed on the findings and tasked his national security team with evaluating possible courses of action. The mission plan and SEAL Team 6's role. After considering various options, including an airstrike, the White House ultimately approved a direct raid by SEAL Team 6, also known as DevGRU, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. The raid plan involved 2 stealth Black Hawk helicopters carrying 24 Navy SEALs, CIA operatives, and an interpreter. The mission was coordinated from a CIA operations center in Langley, Virginia, where President Obama and his top advisors watched the raid unfold in real time via live drone feed. To prepare for the mission, SEAL Team 6 trained extensively using a full-scale replica of bin Laden's compound, conducting multiple rehearsals to simulate possible scenarios. On May 1, 2011, after final approval from President Obama, the mission was set in motion. The raid on bin Laden's compound, May 2, 2011. At approximately 1 a.m. local time, the 2 stealth Black Hawk helicopters carrying the Navy SEALs took off from Jalalabad, Afghanistan, and flew into Pakistani airspace undetected. As the helicopters approached the compound, one of them lost lift and crashed inside the courtyard due to aerodynamic instability caused by the high walls. Despite the setback, the SEALs quickly adapted, securing the perimeter and proceeding with the assault. The SEALs breached the compound, systematically clearing each floor of the 3-story main house. 1. First floor, several Al-Qaeda operatives and bin Laden's couriers, including Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti, were killed in a gunfight. Women and children were moved to safety. Second floor, more resistance was met, but the SEALs pushed forward. Third floor, Osama bin Laden was found in his bedroom, armed with an AK-47 and a Makarov pistol, though he did not fire. SEALs shot bin Laden twice, once in the chest, once in the head, killing him instantly. One of his wives, Amal Ahmed al-Sadr, attempted to protect him, but was shot in the leg. With bin Laden confirmed dead, the SEALs quickly gathered valuable intelligence, including hard drives, documents, and digital files related to Al-Qaeda's operations. Extraction and burial at sea, escaping Abbottabad. With bin Laden's body secured, the SEALs prepared for extraction. The crashed Black Hawk was rigged with explosives and destroyed to prevent sensitive technology from falling into enemy hands. The team boarded the remaining helicopter and returned to Afghanistan. Total time on the ground, approximately 40 minutes. Confirmation of bin Laden's identity. Once in Afghanistan, U.S. officials confirmed bin Laden's identity through facial recognition technology, DNA testing, which showed a 99.9% match with family members. Eyewitness identification by one of his wives, burial at sea, To prevent bin Laden's grave from becoming a terrorist shrine, the US decided to bury him at sea. His body was flown to the USS Carl Vinson, an American aircraft carrier in the North Arabian Sea. A traditional Islamic burial was conducted. His body was washed and wrapped in a white sheet. Prayers were recited in Arabic. His body was placed in a weighted bag and lowered into the sea. This method of disposal was controversial, but US officials argued that it was the best way to ensure bin Laden's death did not become a rallying symbol for extremists. The aftermath and global reactions. US public reaction. When President Obama announced bin Laden's death on May 2, 2011, Americans celebrated across the country, viewing it as justice for the 9/11 attacks. Crowds gathered outside the White House, Times Square, and Ground Zero to chant, "USA, USA." Obama declared, "Justice has been done." International and Pakistani response. Pakistan's government was caught off guard, with some officials expressing outrage over the unauthorized US military raid inside their borders. Some conspiracy theories emerged, with extremists claiming bin Laden was still alive or that the US had fabricated his death. Al-Qaeda confirmed bin Laden's death days later, vowing revenge attacks. Conclusion: Operation Neptune Spear was one of the most daring special operations in US history. It marked the end of Osama bin Laden's reign of terror, closing a critical chapter in the war on terror. However, bin Laden's death did not mean the end of jihadist terrorism. Groups like ISIS later emerged, continuing the ideology he championed. Despite this, the mission sent a clear message to terrorist organizations worldwide. The US would not stop until justice was served. No terrorist leader, no matter how well hidden, was beyond the reach of American intelligence and military power. Legacy and the future of terrorism. Osama bin Laden's death in 2011 marked the end of an era for Al-Qaeda, but it did not mean the end of global jihadist terrorism. In the years that followed, Al-Qaeda adapted. New terrorist groups like ISIS emerged, and the world continued to grapple with the long-term consequences of bin Laden's ideology. Even today, bin Laden's legacy influences global security policies, military strategies, and the evolution of extremist movements. His vision of global jihad did not die with him, and the terrorist networks he helped create continue to pose threats worldwide. Al-Qaeda, after bin Laden, a weakened but persistent threat. Following bin Laden's death, Al-Qaeda faced major setbacks. Loss of its most charismatic leader, which weakened morale. Increased US drone strikes, killing key commanders. Growing competition from ISIS, leading to internal divisions. Ayman al-Zawahiri's leadership. After bin Laden's death, Ayman al-Zawahiri, his longtime deputy, became the new leader of Al-Qaeda. However, Zawahiri lacked bin Laden's charisma and strategic vision, leading to reduced influence over global jihadist networks. Stronger regional Al-Qaeda affiliates, such as in Yemen and Africa, operating more independently. Tensions with ISIS, which ultimately overshadowed Al-Qaeda. Despite these challenges, Al-Qaeda remained active, particularly through its regional branches. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, AQ-APE, based in Yemen, responsible for the Charlie Hebdo attack, 2015. Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, AQIM, active in North and West Africa. Al-Shabaab, an Al-Qaeda-linked group in Somalia that frequently attacks Kenyan and Somali forces. Although significantly weaker than in bin Laden's time, Al-Qaeda survived by adapting, avoiding direct confrontation with the West, and focusing on regional conflicts. The rise of ISIS, a more extreme successor. While Al-Qaeda declined, another jihadist group emerged that was even more brutal and ambitious, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS. Origins of ISIS. Founded by Abu Musab al-Zarqawi in the early 2000s as Al-Qaeda in Iraq, AQI. After Zarqawi's death in 2006, the group rebranded as the Islamic State of Iraq, ISI. Following the US withdrawal from Iraq, 2011, and the Syrian civil war, ISI evolved into ISIS under the leadership of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Key differences between ISIS and Al-Qaeda. More extreme ideology. ISIS used even harsher violence, including public executions and slavery. Territorial control. Unlike Al-Qaeda, ISIS sought to establish a physical caliphate, capturing large parts of Iraq and Syria by 2014. Propaganda and recruitment. ISIS used social media far more effectively than Al-Qaeda, attracting thousands of foreign fighters. At its peak, ISIS controlled vast territories, ruled millions of people, and carried out major terrorist attacks in Europe, Paris, Brussels, London. However, a US-led coalition, Kurdish forces, and local militias eventually defeated ISIS's territorial caliphate by 2019, although ISIS cells remain active today. The long-term impact of bin Laden on global policy. Osama bin Laden's influence extends far beyond his death, shaping 1. US counter-terrorism strategy. The war on terror continues. Even after bin Laden's death, the US continues counter-terrorism operations worldwide. Increased surveillance. Post-9/11 security measures, such as the Patriot Act, expanded government surveillance powers. Drone warfare. The US heavily relies on drone strikes to target terrorist leaders, killing many Al-Qaeda and ISIS commanders. 2. Endless wars in the Middle East. The US invasion of Afghanistan, 2001, and Iraq, 2003, were direct consequences of bin Laden's actions. Even after bin Laden's death, conflicts in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan continued. The Taliban returned to power in 2021, raising questions about whether the war on terror truly succeeded. 3. Radicalization and the next generation of terrorists. Even though bin Laden is gone, his message of global jihad still spreads online. Many lone wolf terrorists in Europe and the US have been inspired by Al-Qaeda and ISIS propaganda. New extremist groups continue to emerge, proving that terrorism is evolving rather than disappearing. Osama bin Laden may have been killed in 2011, but his influence has not disappeared. Al-Qaeda still exists, and ISIS, though weakened, has left a deep impact on global security. Bin Laden's legacy is a reminder that terrorism is not just about one man. It is an ideology. As long as instability, radicalization, and conflicts persist, new threats will continue to emerge, keeping the fight against terrorism far from over. What are your thoughts on Osama bin Laden? Would it have been preferable for him to have been captured alive and brought to trial for his crimes? Share your opinion in the comments below, and as always, thank you for watching.